Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar co-hosted by OSCE and in my office, the Regional Support Office, the Bali process. Great to see so many here today and really looking forward to today's discussions. I'm Ryan Winch, the Transnational Crime and Technology Program Manager from the RSO, and I will be moderating today's discussions. But before we get into the presentations and the panel today, I would like to welcome Carrie Johnstone, OSCE Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings, to provide opening remarks for today's session. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Dear colleagues, partners, and friends, good morning here where I am, good afternoon, evening where others may be. It is really my pleasure to welcome you to the second session of our webinar series on New Frontiers, Generative AI and Human Trafficking. And I would definitely like to begin by thanking again our partner, the Regional Support Office of the Bali process, for co-hosting this webinar. Thanks again, Ryan, for giving me the floor and all of your partnership with us. And I also want to extend my gratitude to all of you, representatives of the private sector, international organizations, and civil society who are joining us today. Yesterday, we began our series with a conversation with civil society, NGOs, and academia. And that discussion reminded us of the critical role these actors play in detecting new patterns of AI-enabled trafficking, amplifying survivors' voices, and contributing evidence and foresight that shape our understanding of how traffickers are misusing technology. The exchanges highlighted both the risks, such as AI grooming, deepfakes, and recruitment through online scams, as well as the opportunities to more effectively collaborate across sectors. So today we're happy to be speaking with the private sector. And this session is designed to build on yesterday's discussion and to bring in the perspectives of the private sector. Together, we will explore how businesses can trace and mitigate AI-facilitated trafficking, what best practices are emerging across different sectors, and where new forms of collaboration are urgently needed. This is a vital conversation because traffickers frequently exploit the very platforms and tools that companies create to connect and empower people. With the digitalization of the crime, online platforms, tech systems can all be misused to recruit, control, and exploit victims. Yet these same tools, when applied responsibly, can also form part of the solution. Robust partnerships with the tech industry are key, and we are already seeing promising examples. I'm just going to give you one example, Microsoft's Project Artemis, which analyzes historical text-based chats to identify grooming behaviors, assign a risk rating, and flag high-risk conversations for human review. This is just one example, and today we are very much looking forward to hearing from more on how companies harness technology to detect suspicious patterns and support both survivors and law enforcement. The private sector has always been at the front lines of technological innovation. With that comes risks and liability, but also opportunity, and I would add responsibility. Companies have unique capabilities to monitor at scale, design safer systems, invest in transparency, and work in partnership with governments and civil society. In 2020, as a result of a mapping exercise that we in the OSCE conducted, we identified together with Tech Against Trafficking, we identified 305 initiatives of technology companies, civil society organizations, and academia where technology is a solution to human trafficking. This was the first compilation of existing technology tools that have been initiated and used in silos across the OSCE to ease identification of victims and traffickers, to raise awareness, improve supply chain management, and map data trends. We will soon release an updated list of tools that we've mapped, again, together with Tech Against Trafficking, this time primarily focusing on solutions to tackle labor trafficking in supply chains. As we begin today's discussion, I encourage you to consider the pressing questions before us. How can companies proactively design safeguards to prevent AI-facilitated trafficking? Where have cross-sector collaborations proven successful? What emerging AI threats should companies anticipate? Our collective goal remains the same: to ensure that innovation advances protection, accountability, and human rights, not exploitation. I'm confident and excited about today's discussion that they will take us one step further in that direction. And thank you again for joining us. And back over to you, Ryan.
Great. And thank you so much, Carrie. I think really setting the scene well for today's discussion. And I think exactly right on the balance between certainly some of the risks coming from the new technology, but also the opportunities this creates. And I think we will discuss both sides through our discussion today. Next, we'll hear from a recorded video message from the RSO's co-manager, David Scott. So over to you, David. Recorded, David.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today for this webinar on generative AI and trafficking in persons. It's great to see such a strong turnout, and I think it shows the real need for conversations on criminal uses of artificial intelligence and the enthusiasm many have for ensuring that AI can be developed safely. I'm David Scott, the Australian co-manager of the Bali Process Regional Support Office, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the second webinar in our three-part series examining the intersection of artificial intelligence and trafficking in persons. I would like to begin by expressing our gratitude to the OSCE Office of the Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings for their partnership in this important initiative. I'd particularly like to thank Kerry Johnstone, the OSCE Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings, for her opening remarks and, of course, her continued leadership on this issue. This collaboration exemplifies the kind of international cooperation that helps address the evolving challenges posed by transnational organised crime and trafficking syndicates. Today's focus on the private sector is particularly significant. As we've witnessed across the Bali Process region and beyond, criminal networks are increasingly sophisticated in their use of technology to exploit vulnerable individuals. From cyber scam centres that have proliferated across Southeast Asia to AI-generated content used in recruitment and coercion, the technological landscape of trafficking is evolving rapidly. The private sector, whether in technology, telecommunications, finance, or recruitment, sit at the forefront of this challenge. Your platforms, services, and innovations are both potential tools for criminals, but important resources for prevention and detection efforts. We know that generative AI has fundamentally changed how traffickers operate. They can now create convincing, fraudulent online personas at scale, generate multilingual content to recruit across borders, and develop sophisticated social engineering campaigns that can deceive even the most cautious individuals. The challenge this presents is unprecedented in its scope and complexity. The RSO has observed an alarming increase in criminal use cases of AI across our region, with particular concern about the misuse of open source models. These accessible AI systems are being leveraged by criminal networks to automate and scale up their operations in ways we have not seen before. We are particularly concerned about the potential for deep fake-driven trafficking recruitment, scaled-up fraud operations, and the full automation of these crimes. It is therefore key that safety processes are put in place before these criminal use cases can proliferate further. Without proactive measures, we risk seeing trafficking and fraud operations that can target thousands of potential victims simultaneously across multiple languages and jurisdictions, and that can evade traditional detection methods. But we do also recognise that the private sector brings unparalleled expertise, resources, and innovation that can combat these challenges. Your participation today represents a commitment to addressing these issues collaboratively, and we're very grateful for your engagement. The RSO has prioritised responding to technology-facilitated trafficking, particularly through our work on cyber scam centres. We've seen firsthand how coordination between different stakeholders, including private sector partners, can make a real difference in disrupting transnational criminal networks and supporting victims of trafficking. Your insights today will be valuable as we work together to stay ahead of these evolving challenges and develop sustainable responses that protect vulnerable individuals while supporting legitimate business operations. I do encourage you to engage actively in today's discussions, to share your experiences and your challenges, and help us all identify practical pathways forward. On behalf of the team at the RSO, thank you for your participation, and I wish you all a very productive and insightful webinar. Thank you.
Great. So I think some really important scene setting there, and good to hear from both the OSCE side and from the RSOs about some of the work we're doing and certainly some of the challenges and points of discussion we hope to address today. So I think really hopefully has set the scene, provided a nice introduction to today's discussions. But I will turn now to our first presentation, and really looking forward actually to turning to the lead author of last year's OSCE RSO policy brief, New Frontiers, which was our first foray into this issue and our first certainly discussion piece that started a lot of the conversations we'll reflect on and build on here today. So on that note, I'll turn to Phil Bennett, Senior Independent Technology Advisor tackling human trafficking and forced labor, for a presentation on private sector implications of AI-facilitated trafficking. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you, Ryan, and a special thanks really to OSCE and the Bali process generally for helping to raise awareness and encouraging collaboration on what I think is becoming a more pressing topic. So I'm delighted to talk about some of the implications for the private sector. I'm going to particularly focus on some aspects related to social media and the way that traffickers connect with potential victims. But first, just a quick sort of thought about the backdrop. We've seen unprecedented changes in technology over the last 5 years, particularly certainly since 2017, when Google released their seminal paper where they introduced transformer technology. We've been extraordinary investment across the private sector into the use of AI, and the private sector is grappling really in multiple directions, from how to use AI as part of its business, but many organizations searching for ways to defend against criminal misuse of this technology as well. Some of the dimensions that I think are pressing and concerning. First, of course, is the change in the sophistication of AI models. We're seeing more sophisticated multimodal, or the ability to have conversations with different types of content. We're seeing increased efficiency of models. So we're seeing now AI being able to run not just in data centers, but on devices, including mobile phones. We're seeing cost reduction of AI, and we're seeing of particular concern is the increasing capability of automating AI. And we sometimes use the term agents to describe this. Really, it's just pieces of software, quite simplistic software often, that enables an interaction between an AI and its environment, like the internet or a person or another software like another agent. AI uses natural language to interact with other agents and people, so it's naturally conducive to scaling. And this is why I think this topic is so important. So, look, traffickers have used social media and messaging apps for many years, actually, to reduce the cost of that crime, reduce or increase the security, and reduce the likelihood of being detected. The use of social media and messaging apps has been happening for a long time. So, what is beginning to change? Well, social media, I think, typically criminals will tend to gravitate to easier, low-cost, highly secure types of technology, and we're beginning to see anecdotally the use of just say off-the-shelf consumer AI technology, for example, in posting adverts, posting other types of content, and of course, there's been heavily advertised about the issues related to abusive content, particularly synthetic abuse imagery. And I think we're seeing really an adaptation of existing processes related to trafficking rather than brand new, sometimes brand new kind of modalities. Now, social media can be a vector of attack, but I believe it's actually our best chance at trying to tackle this issue. It's one of our best lines of defense because humans have control, right, of social media platforms. And we also have an enormous amount of information across the world related to how traffickers are using technology, how it's affecting different communities, and so on. If we were to look at really at the slightly deeper level at trafficking and the different components of it, first of all, if we look at how it's done more generally, not just from a tech perspective, but anti-trafficking experts will generally use the term the means, how it's done. So, for example, the threat of force or coercion, which before technology would have been done, face to face. The issues related to fraud, issues related to deception, um, issues related to perhaps payments or abuse of power more generally. All of these means, which have existed for forever almost, have been made worse through social media, of course, but are potentially made worse through the AI on these types of technologies as well. So we need to sort of look at strategies related to how we actually tackle this. And of course, there are different purposes, I suppose, for this type of trafficking, and they vary. The most common types are, of course, commercial sexual exploitation or forced labor are the types of slavery. So when we sort of analyze this, we shouldn't sort of treat it as a brand new modality, but sort of how the evolution of how social media is perhaps being used by criminals. One of the topics that we raised in the paper was around real-time translation. So one of the threats is around the way in which criminals can now connect with potentially more vulnerable communities through this more natural language approach to conversational recruitment, for example. This is a particular concern, particularly in communities who have not been affected by technology previously or not been affected by trafficking previously. Obviously, in the recent years, there's been an explosion in the amount of mobile phones available, and obviously internet access is becoming far more common than it ever was. When we start coupling that with the potential to automate conversations, then of course there is a real concern that the cost and risk for criminal activity drop significantly as tools that enable the automation of recruitment through these means like threats, like fraud begin to take hold. And of course, we've got other types of aggravators in this space. Deep fake media, of course, is common. We're seeing even consumer apps being able to do this, but from a trafficking perspective, it's particularly concerning related to identity fraud and deception. And it's also, of course, a particular concern related to the influence or coercion or threats, particularly related to certain types of imagery on individuals. So they're adding up to be significant concerns. So we've got to look at what we can do and what we can do about this. And although I'm concerned significantly about the misuse of AI technology in concert with these social media and other apps, I think it is our best chance to try and intercept this as well. More generally, we see that the prevalence of trafficking is in global South countries rather than global North, and majority most commonly used technologies related to social media are global North based in terms of their development. So one of the things that we're going to have to do is to learn to build better collaborations, particularly between organizations on the ground, community-based organizations who understand deeply the sometimes rapidly changing mechanisms of human trafficking, particularly in recruitment and exploitation. I've long been a supporter of these types of collaborations, and others. There are collaborations such as Tech Against Trafficking, which can help build knowledge and expertise. But there are other collaborations related to to building networks between private sector tech company and non-profit organizations there is a tremendous knowledge base on the ground. Small non-profit organizations, we have to begin to connect the dots, that connective tissue between the knowledge on the ground and the technologists able to intercept this on the social media platforms has to be developed. We've got to start looking at this in a strategic way. And there are lots of initiatives related to signal sharing, which might be discussed later, which might help do that. I think the other thing is that I'm strongly encouraging tech companies of all types, but particularly social media, to start really getting to grips with the various typologies of human trafficking, particularly in the global south, particularly those which are related to certain cultural aspects. And again, that collaboration with nonprofits can really help do that, I think. Social media companies are actually pretty good at detecting abuse sometimes on their platforms, although there's always work that can be done. However, related to trafficking, there are particular signals related to the automation, I think, of recruitment, which are going to need some specific expertise and programs to help develop. I think the concern is that with the AI automation, we are looking at a situation where recruitment conversations and that progression of trust between a criminal or an AI and the potential victim grows. There's definitely a Venn diagram here between that and other types of scamming, but we need specific expertise developed on these anti-trafficking programs, and we need additional research programs, I think, particularly around the cross-sectorial collaborative initiatives, particularly those in the global south, connecting them with technologists to really start building out those prevention programs on those platforms. And I think that is our pathway to really intercepting this. Lots more to talk about, I think, but I'm time limited, so I'm going to hand you back to Ryan. Thank you very much indeed.
Great. And thanks so much, Phil. I think some really important insights around engaging with local communities. And I think also a really important angle around prevention. I think so much is changing so rapidly here. And I'd say the scale of some of the awareness raising, the prevention work needed to prepare people for some of the deep fakes and the, let's say, the lack of trust in what you're seeing online with some of the advances in AI is somewhat unprecedented. So I think a really important angle to draw out and to close your discussion on. So thank you, Phil. Next, we'll turn to Lynn Dudenhofer, a very close partner of both organizations here today and a senior intelligence, technology, and AI expert. Over to you, Lynn.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I'm happy to be here today, and thank you for having me. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen straight away, which you should be able to see now. So I want to dive in a little bit deeper into the topic of AI, in particular when it comes to transnational organized crime, and therein particularly the trafficking in human beings. So just to give a little bit of an overview, what I'll talk about today is, first of all, briefly, the use of AI in transnational organized crime, then countering this use of AI, and then I'll speak about an outlook for a little bit. Shouldn't take too long, but just to remind everyone what we're talking about, a little bit of an overview. So artificial intelligence has actually been around for quite some time. As Phil said, it's essentially just machine learning and algorithms that it's made up of. And what we're looking at now, which is the more complex version thereof, is generative AI. So you can see here in that visualization that generative AI is essentially a subset which concerns neural networks with more layers and connections. And therein now, when we're thinking of ChatGPT, GPT-5, which just came out a while ago, and then also the competitors such as Meta's or Llama models, which are open source. Those are so-called large language models, which are neural networks with essentially billions of parameters trained on vast amounts of unlabeled text in either self-supervised or semi-supervised learning. So that is just to give a little bit of background in terms of what we're talking about today, just to set the scene a little bit. So without further ado, I'm going to dive right in. So some of the trends that we've been seeing in the past couple of years concern the use of AI, particularly for scripting and social engineering purposes, for automated workflows, such as automated translation integration, to in direct communication to scam potential victims or of human trafficking, particularly also what we're seeing more and more into so-called cyber scam centers. And what we're seeing a lot then as well are deepfake scams for fraud. So deepfake software suites have been on the rise for a little while. You can see a screenshot here. I'm going to show a video in a second as well. But this is one of those deepfake software suites that is being sold. And we're seeing those software suites being sold, for example, on Telegram, or at least advertised on Telegram, and then sold in direct communication, mostly through crypto transactions. And this is somewhat of a concerning trend, which can also be used for Know Your Customer bypass, which is a safety measure or regulation introduced by banking apps, where just one front-facing photo allegedly is enough to perform a real-time AI face swap during a video call, for example. So just to have you look at these two videos that are essentially ads that we're seeing when it comes to the transnational organized crime and deepfake software suites that are being specifically marketed to transnational organized crime syndicates. And you can see here that there are certain indicators that show us that the technology has improved. So what we see is that these people are touching their face, they're touching their hair. You can see in the video on the left-hand side that the woman put her head to the front. They're repeatedly turning their face, which are all indicators that the technology has improved. You can see this person opening their mouth. Back in the day, during for AI face swap technologies, this wasn't possible. The technology would glitch, the software would glitch, and it would be apparent that this technology essentially was fake. Now these technologies are getting more and more convincing. You can see there they're touching the face again. And what that means is that the technology significantly improved in the past couple of years, supported by obviously generative AI. So what they have done is they have, for the development of such deepfake software suites, integrated open source software parts, such as, for example, Google Face Mesh, which tracks facial points and expressions in real time. And in deepfake tools, that then means that the face swap looks a lot more realistic and is way harder to spot. So the same goes for the open source large language models that can be downloaded and jailbroken. Jailbreaking is a concept that I'm going to speak about in 2 minutes, a bit more. But all of these open source software parts and AI that are available now are being combined to support essentially transnational organized crime syndicates, as well as particularly for the purpose of trafficking human beings into specific locations, such as, for example, cyber scam centers. Now, the jailbroken large language models, which are somewhat concerning, are essentially a large language model where the safeguards and regulations have been removed. So that means that, back in the day, that was for ChatGPT, in its early days, it was possible to do that with a prompt where you would ask it to, for example, cook up drugs, and it would not tell you. But then when you told it that you were a law enforcement official, it would tell you. So obviously, the model has since been improved, and this is not possible anymore, as it shouldn't be. If you have, though, the right technological skill set, you can download open source models and essentially alter the source code in a manner so that specific safety regulations are removed, and the large language model will function in a manner, and whichever manner you want it to function and support you, meaning that it can potentially enable threat actors as well as transnational organized crime syndicates. So what we've been seeing is that jailbroken large language models, even though not everyone has the skill set to actually jailbreak large language models, they're being advertised and sold on Telegram as well. This is just one of the platforms, but it is the dominating platform in this particular context. And they're then being used to create malicious content such as malware or ransomware for cyber-enabled fraud for scam purposes as well as extortion purposes. So that's another somewhat concerning trend. But if we're talking about countermeasures, what that means in turn is that we, especially also in the private sector, but also in public and private sector collaboration, need to ensure that we focus on responsible as well as trusted adoption of AI in law enforcement agencies, as well as any other investigative context and collaboration. And that also means that we slowly but surely need to embark on the path of, thinking about governance, infrastructure, and capacity to support such operational use. And that means for us then that AI, in terms of AI readiness, should eventually lead triage, multilingual analysis, and certain other investigative workflows. If we do not focus on AI readiness as such, we might struggle with such risks as bias or unverifiable outputs, because AI will then remain a bit of a black box for us. We might misallocate resources or also just risk reputational damage. So in saying all that, I'm not sure if you've heard of the human in the loop concept, but it is a pretty prominent concept in setting up AI infrastructure, particularly when supporting decision-making or search workflows. And essentially, it just means that the human in the loop has to remain mandatory and obligatory, and that decision-making, particularly also in operational contexts, cannot be done without the human in the loop. Now, I could talk about the human in the loop some more, and I'm happy to answer some questions later on about this as well. But together with the human in the loop as the final verifier and decision maker, AI has the potential to act as a force multiplier for protection as well as disruption and justice in counter-trafficking contexts. So I'm about to wrap it up here, but essentially what we're looking at in terms of generative AI in transnational organized crime, and what we will be looking at, but also what we're already looking at in part, is we're looking at a rather large environment or landscape of further tech emergence. So we're seeing open source AI tooling, we're seeing a widespread generative AI adoption. We've already seen deepfake creation, and this is now at the stage where it's being optimized and scaled. So that is why, for example, we're seeing so many of these ads on platforms such as Telegram, particularly targeting, for example, organized crime syndicates in cyber scam centers with their advertisement. Now, then this can be used for fraud deployment. It can be used for crime as a service, right? Where the deepfake as a service means that the deepfake software suite is now not only being sold, it's also got like a 24/7 customer support. It's got bug fixing scripts that are regularly being deployed. So it's a whole infrastructure where the crime as a service is now a concept. And then we're seeing this at scale because the barrier to entry for certain threat actors has been lowered. It means that, and this is something that Phil already mentioned, that we're seeing an automation thereof, which can also be used for fraud operations. And we're also seeing multi-stage as well as polymorphic AI agents. Now, that means that deepfakes, for example, will increasingly be used for cyber-enabled fraud as well as all sorts of variations thereof. And soon enough, we're going to be seeing this at an industrial scale, which is why I've been talking about AI readiness. So that means in conclusion, some of the emerging risks include AI deepfake tools that are being advertised and sold on either, underground markets or Telegram. We're seeing fraud as well as malware automation, not quite at scale, but we will be seeing that as an emerging risk or threat. And we are seeing that jailbroken such software, such as jailbroken large language models, are lowering the entry barriers and support the scaling of cyber-enabled fraud. In terms of the response then and AI readiness that I've been talking about, that means that we need to be looking at interdisciplinary teams, the forming of interdisciplinary teams. So I don't only mean my next point where I say, public and private partnerships, which are obviously extremely important in this context, but also mean that in one team already, we do need particularly diverse skill sets to tackle such an emerging risk or threat. So we want to combine cyber skills, we want to combine finance skills or intelligence, forensics, victim protection, and we want to do all that by collaborating between the public sector and the private sector so that tech, telecom, and financial sectors can all work together with the public sector. And I guess in conclusion for me, that means that AI-enabled fraud is scaling faster than any of our traditional responses. So that means that then only joint and interdisciplinary as well as cross-sectoral collaboration can keep pace with that. In turn, that also means that the importance and relevancy of capacity building will only increase. So these are just some of my final remarks for my talk. And very happy to take any questions later on, but I think I have brought across my main points. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Lynn. I somehow always still think human in the loop is a roller coaster, but it is a much more practical framework for thinking about AI. But thank you. And I think it really does drive home the potential impact of what we're seeing when we actually see those videos that you put forward there, and just seeing the quality of the deepfake technology today is, really alarming and really shows the urgency of the discussion here today. How do we prevent traffickers from using deepfake technology like that to facilitate trafficking and to conceal their identities? So to move this discussion forward and to turn to the panel that we brought together here, I'd like to welcome Jem Krapayun, researcher, Frontier Security from the Institute for AI Policy and Strategy, Lale Tekisal, Associate Director, Technology and Human Rights at BSR, and Priyank Mathur, CEO of Mythos Labs. So welcome to the three of you. I'll begin with you, Jam. As a researcher on frontier AI security, what emerging misuse cases do you see traffickers or organized crime networks more broadly potentially exploiting? For example, automated grooming, synthetic identities, and large-scale persuasion tools. And which risks do you think are understudied or underestimated by AI developers and potentially also policymakers today?
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks again to the OSCE and the Regional Support Office, the volley process for inviting me to join the panel. So I think the substantive effect of what I'll say like is frontier AI is that it creates operational capacity for criminals and malicious actors. Not only that, it generates content. So, which isn't to say that the content generation itself isn't impactful. Obviously, the presentations and talks by the speakers have shown that these are indeed concerning capabilities. But my take is that this only captures a small fraction of how new AI systems can augment criminal tactics. So we're already seeing strong indicators that organized crime groups can leverage AI systems in this way, basically allowing individual operators to sometimes have the impact of an entire cyber criminal team. So there's an interesting finding that was actually echoed in Lynn's presentation earlier, but is from two recent reports from Anthropic and OpenAI from just earlier this year, basically that frontier AI is lowering barriers to more technical cyber crimes. So you have in one case, a cyber criminal used Claude Code, which is Anthropic's coding agent, to conduct a scaled data extortion operation, hitting multiple international targets. I think something like they compromised 17 organizations within a month, even though the operator couldn't write basic code themselves. So it was the AI that was actually doing the hacking, helping the operator make tactical decisions about what data to exfiltrate. It also helped them craft psychologically targeted ransom demands. In another really interesting case, North Korean operatives were able to get positions as remote IT workers in Fortune 500 companies, despite being able to perform basic technical tasks or even communicate in English. So the AI was used to kind of build a persona that went through the interview process, actually help them pass the interview, and then managed to deliver sort of help them deliver day-to-day technical work that satisfied their line managers. And previously, North Korean IT worker operations relied on really highly skilled individuals that were recruited and trained from a young age within North Korea. But now, sort of use of AI has kind of allowed them to rapidly kind of speed up this process. And then there's a third case where there was a threat actor based in the UK or identified as being from the UK that had very little evident coding ability, was able to use a coding agent to kind of develop, market, and sell ransomware, even though traditionally this required fairly technical expertise in areas like cryptography. So I think the implications of this are quite underestimated and deserve more investigation. So basically, if you see more powerful agentic capabilities that can be accessed by criminal groups that impart these sort of technical capabilities, how does that change the relative ROI, return on investment, for different kinds of criminal activities? So if you look at something at like human trafficking, for example, human trafficking specifically for cyber scam call centers, it's premised on a criminal operations need for labor, generally unskilled labor, outside of maybe specific language skills that are useful for those kinds of operations. And there's a lot of friction to trafficking. You're forced to do things in the actual physical world. So arranging transportation, managing physical locations, dealing with law enforcement at borders, maintaining control, physical control over victims. And each of these steps introduces risks, costs, and potential points of failure. But if these criminal groups can now access AI agents that are capable of conducting a lot of these scams autonomously, handling victim engagement, crafting persuasive messages, managing dozens of conversations simultaneously, then the economic calculus, I think, fundamentally shifts. Because why invest in kind of higher risk, high overhead operations of trafficking when AI systems could potentially at least deliver similar or better results at a fraction of the cost and risk? So what's the overall effect of this? It's possible you might see a reallocation of resources towards more sophisticated technical cyber crimes that were previously inaccessible to a lot of these actors. So the same groups today that are running sort of basic romance scams with traffic labor might now be able to pivot to ransomware operations, data extortion, cryptocurrency theft, or other kinds of more sophisticated attacks. So it's kind of an open question in my mind. Would we see a kind of reduction in overall trafficking, you know, over the long term, or maybe it's possible that because they've already invested in building out this infrastructure and expertise when it comes to human trafficking, they would then just pivot to supplying victims for maybe a different kind of illicit purpose. But you know, I think these are kind of open questions that I think are sort of understudied at the moment.
Yeah, I have about a dozen follow-ups noted down here for you, but I will go through the panel and I'll take this moment to note as well there is the Q&A function underneath. So for participants, please feel free to leave a question there, and either we'll respond in writing or turn to them after the main panel questions here. But so from there, we'll turn to you, Lale. So you work at BSR's Tech Against Trafficking initiative, or you work with them, and this has brought together companies across sectors to look into how technology can both enable and disrupt trafficking. Could you share some key lessons from your work and any discussions you may have had related to AI in this context where companies, from your vantage point, continue to face challenges in addressing tech-facilitated trafficking?
Definitely happy to do that, Ryan, and thank you so much for having me. Maybe I'll start with providing a bit of background about Tech Against Trafficking for those who may not be familiar. Tech Against Trafficking, or TAT for short, is a coalition of tech companies that came together in 2018 to leverage technology in the fight against human trafficking. And as part of TAT, we bring tech companies together, and we also connect tech companies with civil society, with anti-trafficking experts, to both leverage technology to fight human trafficking, but also to prevent and disrupt technology-facilitated trafficking. And actually, the OSCE and Phil have been involved with TAT since the beginning, and they continue to serve as advisors. So really great to be here and have this conversation with you all. So in response to your question, I want to share 3 challenges and 3 learnings, starting with the challenges that companies are facing in addressing AI-enabled online harms, including those related to human trafficking. The first one, I think, is the scale and speed. The scale of tech-facilitated harms is becoming much bigger with AI. Similarly, the speed at which harms are evolving is becoming much more rapid, and so detection and enforcement become challenging for companies. The other speakers today, Lynn, Phil, Jem, have all explained how AI is removing barriers for criminals and making them more effective. And as a result, these online harms are happening at a much bigger scale, and companies are struggling to keep up with the volume. And one thing that this leads to is it reduces the ability of companies to prioritize the highest risk cases that require escalation to law enforcement, leading to bottlenecks in collaboration with law enforcement, and to delays in identifying real-world harms. Second challenge that I want to highlight is that remediation is becoming more challenging for companies due to the nature of the technology and the content. So normally, the way that online platforms deal with online harms is primarily to remove content or take action against users that are engaging in harmful conduct. However, when we look at AI-generated or AI-enabled harmful content or conduct, removing content or taking action against users may not be enough, because that does not affect the AI model's ability to create new content or repeat the same harms. So companies also need to think about controls at the level of the AI model or app, as Lynn also mentioned. But this is not as easy as it sounds, because questions then are, so do you remove access to AI models, for example? Do you take down apps that enable such conduct, or do you continue addressing individual violations? So in short, it's challenging to identify appropriate and proportionate mitigation measures. And the third challenge I want to mention is that there is a larger number of companies involved, which makes coordination difficult. When we think of AI-enabled harms, we need to think about the whole AI value chain. Who are the companies, who are the private sector actors that are relevant or associated with these harms? So thinking of the whole AI value chain, starting from the upstream data collection and training of algorithms, we have companies that collate or train data sets, platforms that host these data sets. Then we have companies, of course, that develop AI models, companies that take these models, fine-tune them, and integrate them into their applications or solutions. And finally, when we think of the downstream use or sharing of AI outputs, then of course we have social media platforms and other types of platforms where AI-generated content might be shared or AI-facilitated conduct can happen. All of these actors touch the issue from different points. They are all associated with the harm, but they have different levels of responsibility, and there are different types of leverage that they can apply within this ecosystem. So these are challenging questions to answer, and we are still, I think, discovering what shared responsibility looks like in the AI ecosystem. And of course, for such new challenges, it's very important for companies to come together and collaborate with each other. With that, I want to tie it back to Tech Against Trafficking and share three learnings from the work that we're doing at TAT. The first is the importance of sharing. As everyone mentioned, the space is evolving fast, especially when we talk about generative AI. And so companies coming together to share learnings is very valuable to better understand the threat landscape, seeing how different platforms, different tech tools can be misused. Also, forming a common language about these harms. I think that's really important because without a common language, it's difficult to collaborate. For example, at Tech Against Trafficking, we do cross-company learning sessions and discussions where different types of companies, different types of platforms share how they're seeing the issue manifest on their platforms or their products. They share challenges or good practices, and we try to generate ideas for collective action. So the first is importance of sharing within the industry, but then it's also very important to engage with other stakeholders outside of the private sector. A few of the speakers mentioned this as well, but collaboration with civil society, of course, with anti-trafficking experts, and importantly, with experts with lived experience. This is important because companies don't know everything. They can't, and there's really strong anti-trafficking expertise that companies can benefit from. And if they don't engage with these experts early on, companies risk having gaps in their response. I think this is particularly important for companies to understand what's going on globally. Many tech companies are based in North America or in Europe, and even though there's improvement, they frequently miss having a global perspective. So engaging with anti-trafficking groups around the world and co-creating solutions with them is important. And then the third learning I want to talk about is seeing technology as part of the solution. One of the things that I like about our work at TAT is that we really try to look at both sides of the coin when it comes to technology and trafficking. We look at how tech is part of the problem, but also how it's part of the solution. And I think that's a good approach because when we see technology as only the problem or only a solution, that creates an unnecessary kind of dichotomy. So just to give you an example, one thing that we do at Tech Against Trafficking is we run an accelerator program where we bring together anti-trafficking NGOs and engineers from tech companies to work on tech solutions to fight trafficking. As part of this program, we built lots of learnings on how AI can be used in anti-trafficking work. I won't go into detail. I know Priyank after me will also talk about some really impactful tech solutions. So let me pause there and turn it back to you, Ryan.
Great, thanks, Lale. And I think, yeah, really kind of important framing. And I think the purpose of this webinar series really is, to what you said, highlighting that tech and AI itself is it's not inherently good or bad, and we have choices to make, and certainly ways that we can put it to use on both a positive side, but risking, say, the criminals using it in the other way. So how do we kind of find that balance where we can use this technology in a way that is safe and productive, supporting the continued development of what is, at its core, a very exciting new technology in AI. But to speak to that, and I think really, well, to speak to some of this global perspective as well, that you touched on, Lale, bringing together Asia, Europe, North America. We did put this in a time zone that I think hopefully hits North America, well, and those of us up slightly later here in Asia, but would like to bring in to talk about his company's responses and some of these positive use cases that we really think are both possible, but also really exciting opportunities. Turning to you, Priyank. So your company, Mythos Labs, has used AI and strategic communications to counter disinformation and online harms, particularly related to scamming. How did those approaches translate to, or how could those approaches translate to efforts to address trafficking in persons? And could you share some examples of where communication strategies or AI-driven interventions have or could have been used to shift behaviors and disrupt harmful narratives?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be with you and good to see you again after we were just in Singapore a couple weeks ago. Thank you, everybody, for the great turnout, and thank you to our gracious hosts, RSO and OSC, for organizing this. My company, Mythos Labs, our mission statement is to use AI and strategic communications to combat global security threats. Some of the main threat areas that we focus on are terrorism and online scams. My own background is more in terrorism. My background was I worked as a counterterrorism intel officer and a policy analyst. But over the last 5-6 years, even in the work we're doing, it's become very clear that scams and online fraud, whatever we want to call it, is becoming maybe as big or if not bigger a problem and a more urgent problem and a more devastating problem than almost any other threat area in the world. And a lot of that has been touched on by the great speakers before me. To your question about how we've seen examples of stratcoms or AI being used to influence behaviors, on the strategic communication side, I think we've seen a couple things that work. One is edutainment. These days, if you're trying to convey a message, it doesn't matter if you're a news channel or a church or a politician running for election, you have to make your message entertaining, otherwise no one will listen to it. And the definition of what is entertaining is changing very rapidly. 6 years ago, a video most likely to go viral on YouTube would have been about 5 to 9 minutes long in most markets. Today, videos that are most likely to go viral on TikTok, Instagram, and even YouTube Shorts are under 30 seconds. So the length of the kind of content we consume, the tone of that content, the style, and then even the focus areas and how we introduce subjects, all of that is constantly changing. So I think a good strategic communications response has to take that into account. And unfortunately, a lot of governments and civil society and organizations that are working on combating scams are not always as quickly adapting to new entertainment tastes as some of the bad actors are, which is why, as some of the speakers before me mentioned, we've seen them use these new technologies much quicker and much less hesitatingly than the quote unquote good guys. The other thing that we've seen work with strategic communications is context and agency. So there is a group within Google called Jigsaw, which is like Google's incubator. They're doing a lot of great work on what moves the needle when it comes to strategic communication for online harms. And one of the things that they're talking about a lot these days is a concept called structural agency, which is the idea that we all feel that we want to do things to make our world better or to make our communities or even ourselves individually safer. And yet there's a growing deficit between what we think we can actually achieve as systems and institutions get more complicated. That gap increases. So AI actually presents a great way to try and bridge that deficit, because in general gives people not just answers, but a sense of agency. It's not, hear me?
Oh, you're cutting in and out a little bit, but it looks like
Okay,
you're back
sorry.
now.
Yeah, apologies for that. I'm
Just
in
the
New
last few
York.
seconds. You're good now.
Yeah. So what I was saying is that I think that, to me, the secret power of AI when it comes to strategic communications and giving people education about how to protect themselves from scams, how to report scams, a lot of that has to do with the fact that what makes it unique is it's not just giving you answers the way the internet does. If you go to a web page, you can go to a frequently asked questions site and get a lot of answers already about how to spot scams and how to defend scams. But to truly get a sense of agency and feel like you're in control of the process, human beings, just the way we're wired, we want to be able to have a conversation. We want to have someone with whom we can have a back and forth, ask follow-up questions, and really feel like we're in charge and have some sort of control. And I think that's where AI has massive potential. So my own company, we've developed a solution called Sago, which is a generative AI system for preventing and combating scams. And I can try to share my screen if you don't mind, Ryan, or if you'd rather keep this sort of without slides, happy to just talk as well.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so while I'm pulling that up, what Sago essentially um, is a two-pronged approach. On the user-facing side, there is a chatbot that warns people about scams. So it can be used to prevent, to recognize scams. I don't know if my screen is visible, Ryan.
No.
Okay, let's just do it without a screen. Then maybe my connection's not great enough. I apologize.
Yeah, if you want, we can share anything to participants after as well.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll just happy to walk you through it. Essentially, it's a chatbot that is free to talk to on WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. And when a user receives something suspicious, like literally this morning when I switched my US SIM card on, I got, and I hate to say this because I know there might be representatives from Indeed online, but I'm sure they see this as a big problem too. I got a text message from someone claiming to be with Indeed. I can literally read it out right now, and I think this is relatable to a lot of people. Hello, sorry to bother you. I'm Emily from Indeed. We would like to offer you an online remote job. You can earn 100 to 500 euros per day, work 60 to 90 minutes at the time and place of your choice. If you meet the requirements, reply yes, etc., etc. To me, and I sure everybody on this call, we're familiar with this type of thing. It might even be a pig butchering and a trafficking for forced labor type of scam. But what I did is, if you get a message like that, you can just take a screenshot or forward it to Sago on WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. Sago will tell you, A, is this likely a scam? B, what are the red flags? And C, how can you report it safely? So to the user, it's sort of a free resource. And then they can ask follow-up questions and say, well, why is it a scam? But are you sure? I've already talked to this guy. What should I do now? If you're in Australia, it'll tell you how to use Scam Watch resources. If you're in India, it'll tell you how to report stuff to the RBI, et cetera, et cetera. On the back end, we're collecting all these unreported scams that, or rather these scams that would not have been reported otherwise. So when people forward these messages to Sago, on the back end, there's a separate AI agent whose job is just to analyze that large data set of scams that people have sent screenshots of or forwarded, and from that generate actionable insights that banks, law enforcement, technology companies can use to enhance their scam prevention efforts. So we can find phone numbers, bank account numbers, email addresses associated with scammers, as well as new types of scams before they go viral. And then, of course, digital literacy and financial literacy gaps, making people more vulnerable to scams. And the more people who use it, the more insights we get. We've got 2 distribution partners already. Meta is helping us distribute Sago in the Middle East, Africa, and in APAC. And we're also partnering with Anthropic, which was mentioned earlier by Jam. And this is a great example of what we've all been talking about. Anthropic is being used by scammers to do very sophisticated scams, as Jam mentioned. It's also being used by us to develop the analytics on the back end for scam-related insights that Sago uses. So a clear-cut example is sort of the double-edged sword of these AI tools. But the optimistic point in all this is that I do think the scammers have been using AI for weeks, months, maybe even years, generative AI. Governments, civil society, private companies are starting to do that a bit slower. So the good news there is that there's more room for us to improve there and to even out that gap, that deficit between, the good actors and the bad actors. So Sago is just one example. I imagine there will be lots of innovation in this space. Lots of other companies will come up with great solutions that leverage generative AI for scam prevention, for analysis, for real-time sharing of scam signals. But that's sort of one thing, Ryan, to your point about how AI is being used and how Stratcoms is being used. I think if you combine the sort of agency giving powers of AI chatbots with the analytic prowess that they can also bring, you can suddenly start to use both AI and strategic communications very effectively to combat this scamdemic that is affecting everybody.
Great, thank you. And I think, well, a perfect follow-up to what we've heard and really some of the positive use cases that you're seeing. I mean, I know that Sago is primarily focused on fraud, but certainly from our region in the Asia Pacific, fraud and trafficking in the context of cyber scam centers are just so closely linked at the moment. And I mean, combating one is combating them both. So I mean, it's really great to see kind of how widespread the rollout is, or will be soon, and look forward to hearing more about the results as you get them in. But I think off of that, I'll turn back to you, Lale, and for a question on what kinds of systems or practices should companies put in place to spot and reduce the risks of AI being used for trafficking, and how can teams either inside a company or partners outside it, perhaps like the OSCE and the RSO, work together more effectively on this and work together more effectively with the private sector as well?
Yeah, I can take a first stab at this, but would love to hear others' thoughts as well. So first thing I'll say is that many tech companies already have good AI safety or responsible AI or trust and safety programs. So I think these can be leveraged to disrupt AI facilitated trafficking, but we need to make sure that these programs and these policies and processes include human trafficking expertise. Just to give a few concrete examples of good practices I've seen from tech companies. For example, including anti-trafficking experts in their in their safety advisory councils, for example. I'm seeing more and more examples of this, which is a great development. Including anti-trafficking experts in their red teaming efforts. So these are typically methods that tech companies use to stress test their AI models or products that they're building to anticipate potential risks, and including anti-trafficking experts in these processes can really help identify potentially unintended harms that companies might otherwise miss. Similarly, consulting experts when companies are developing their AI safety or platform safety policies and co-creating solutions with anti-trafficking groups. I think those are helpful, impactful ways that they can use. One thing I will note is that I think this should go beyond developers of AI. Companies deploying AI solutions in their business should also put in place processes to identify potential harms. For example, think of a company that deploys AI solutions in their for hiring people in their HR processes. This AI solution might be discriminating against survivors of trafficking. Now, this is not exactly a case where AI is being used to facilitate trafficking, but I think it's still an important, um, important type of harm that we should be thinking about. So, to mitigate such risks, AI companies deploying AI solutions should also conduct due diligence on the AI models or AI solutions that they are purchasing, that they are deploying and using internally. And then to respond to your second question on sort of more effective collaboration between private sector and other organizations such as the OSCE or RSO, I think we need to see this as a two-way dialogue that can benefit both parties. For tech companies, I think it's clear that engaging with anti-trafficking experts bring lots of value, as we discussed, to be able to identify new trends, to be able to have a more global perspective. But also for civil society and for international organizations, I think engaging with tech companies really allow them to better understand how technology works, how technology companies work, so that they can advocate for good policies, for example. Because in our work, we see that often civil society organizations don't really understand how tech companies work, and so engagement with the private sector can be limited, or the impact of that engagement can be limited. Actually, last year, BSR, the organization that I work for, we partnered with the Omidyar Group, and we published a guide for civil society organizations to better engage with the private sector and specifically with tech companies. Happy to share the link with the audience to have a look. But so yeah, in short, I think seeing this as a two-way dialogue and really trying to understand how different actors work is important.
Great, thank you. And I think, well, a lot of important points there on partnership and working together. But I think with that, I will turn over to Jam and very much welcome your thoughts on kind of public-private or intergovernmental organizational private sector engagement. But I think also maybe to look forward a little bit from this. If we're looking ahead, maybe 3 to 5 years, what frontier threats or emerging challenges would you anticipate moving forward that traffickers or organized crime networks could exploit? So not just what we're seeing today, but this, say, more medium-term outlook. How could they exploit new AI capabilities? And how should the private sector look today to prepare for what may be coming?
Sure. I think I'll focus my answer on sort of AI agents and agent systems because that's what I spend most of my time thinking about. And I'll kind of first talk about two broader technological trends that I think will sort of provide helpful context for the threats that I want to highlight. So there's data from a research institute, Meter, that shows that AI agents are tackling increasingly complex software tasks. So at the moment, they can now handle software engineering tasks that would take a human developer about just over 2 hours to complete with about 50% success rate. And this task, and maybe more notably, the task length has been doubling every 7 months since they started collecting this data. The second tech trend is the rapidly falling cost of frontier AI at a given level of capabilities. So another research institute, Epoch AI, has found that frontier AI performance becomes accessible on consumer hardware within the year. So basically, with just a single, top of the line gaming GPU, anyone can run a local model that matches the absolute frontier of LLM performance from just 6 to 12 months ago. So that's, quite rapidly falling costs. So what's the effect of this trend? Basically, I mean, everyone, including malicious actors, will get access to more powerful agentic capabilities over time if the trends hold, meaning that they could likely automate more and more of their sort of online operations, including more technically and operationally sophisticated tasks. And these capabilities will continue to be available to a wider and wider set of groups and individuals. So it sort of sets up the two frontier threats that I want to talk about. First is this kind of idea of like highly autonomous cybercrime agents, which my team at IAPS is currently researching, and we're sort of maybe tentatively estimating could arrive in as soon as 5 years. So these would be systems that are capable of initiating and carrying out sustained cyber campaigns with very minimal or without any human supervision, which is essentially like having sort of a software native cybercrime organization that's available, at the push of a button. And there are a lot of incentives to sort of potentially deploy some of these systems. They confer a lot of operational advantages to criminal organizations. It reduces a lot of the traditional friction around command and control. It creates more distance between like the human operator and the actual agent performing the criminal activity. So helps maintain sort of plausible deniability. Also more difficult to shut down these systems. So, very emergent threat, still, speculative in nature, but potentially something to be very concerned about. The second threat I want to highlight is a bit more sort of ecosystem oriented, but this was covered in a recent paper by researchers at Google DeepMind, which basically talks about how the widespread presence of capable AI agents might lead to a new sort of virtual economic layer on top of the kind of human economy. So you have agents that are making transactions with one another at scales and speeds that are, well beyond the ability for any human to kind of directly oversee, at least with, a good amount of situational awareness. And the idea is that if you have this virtual economic layer, but agents still have a lot of these security vulnerabilities like they do today, which has been highlighted by some of the other speakers, then these agents can then be exploited to do things like leak sensitive information about their principals, spend resources without authorization, be manipulated into making things like fraudulent transactions. In effect, the agents become the victims themselves of crimes. So if people, including vulnerable people, are relying on these agents for many important things, then this could have very serious effects on people's livelihoods. So in terms of what companies can do, I think firstly, there's a lot of things around kind of situational awareness and building threat intelligence that can be shared more broadly. I kind of highlighted some of the reports coming from Anthropic and OpenAI as examples of that. I think there's also a lot more room to invest time and money into kind of R&D to improve on some of these core vulnerabilities. So more investments in ways to improve adversarial robustness of some of these systems. Also investigate methods to potentially detect and disrupt sort of these adversarial agent systems.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think AI-driven layers of the economy, there's some pieces there that certainly I hadn't thought of that raise a whole new range of concerns or at least questions from my side. But good to get us thinking. I think I'll turn to you, Priyank, and maybe just to the same question. If you're thinking, 3 to 5 years out, how would you start preparing if you were a business, really of any kind? And I mean, also maybe from your perspective, do you think tools like the ones you're developing might be able to address some of these more medium or longer term challenges that could arise from AI?
Yeah, I think I would say that a couple of things you might want to set in motion now if you're preparing for 5 years ahead. Let's say you're a company that's, and to be honest, when it comes to trafficking and scams, there's almost no industry that's not impacted in some way, tangentially or directly. So the few things that I would recommend, and that I think a lot of companies that are quite forward thinking might already be doing. Number one is rethink procurement when it comes to AI solutions, because right now, I think at a lot of big companies, and this is sort of the boring stuff that we don't like to talk about usually, but the very important stuff of how do companies actually source and find new solutions for these evolving threats. That process has not really kept up pace. It's still sort of done in a very typical, a company might look for an anti-scam solution or a cyber defense protection solution that is AI based, the same way they would have looked for SaaS solutions or for software as a service solutions. And that process of testing and sourcing is obviously much longer. It also involves a heavy dependence on, existing sort of set of suppliers that have skills in one domain but may not be inventing or innovating when it comes to generative AI solutions. So I think that that's a blind spot that might be holding innovation back, is just kind of giving AI the respect it deserves. And if we're looking at AI-based threats and AI-based solutions, really developing a new category, a new system of procuring them that has to be a lot more agile, that has to be a lot more connected to sort of the ground truths and the evolving realities, like Jam and others are talking about, how quickly these things are changing compared to some older technologies. So that's one, is procurement reform. The second thing that I would look ahead to is, I do think that small language models are going to start to play a bigger role in AI-powered defensive solutions and cybersecurity solutions. So what that means is that you might have heard some buzz recently about, small language models becoming more attractive to investors, more attractive to companies. This is, of course, sort of the same concept as an LLM. There's no, Jam and others can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's a technical definition of how many parameters exactly something has to have for it to be small language model versus large. It's more sort of a subjective term that we use to describe a model that is not meant to be an expert in all things or a generalist in all things, but more specialized in a certain domain. So I do think when it comes to trafficking and scams and signals, the more data we start to collect, and GASA, there was recently unveiled, a new sort of signal sharing dashboard. There's lots of new signal sharing mechanisms that are popping up, which is great. As we start to get more of this data, we'll be able to train specialized models for looking at trafficking and scam related signals that I think will be more cost efficient than trying to use some of the foundational models that OpenAI and others have to try and attack this problem at a larger level. So I think that, looking at small language models and adjusting the speed and the nature of how we procure AI-based solutions, whether you're a big government or a small company looking to defend itself, I think those two are sort of like large-scale trends that would require some foresight and some planning from now so that you are prepared in 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, okay. And I think, yeah, really interesting insights. And I think I certainly have some more reading on AI myself when we start getting into some of the discussions of smaller models and, say, cybersecurity, safety applications. I think, if nothing else, I'm going to take from that I need to kind of deepen my knowledge on some of these aspects moving forward, because I think we've seen today just how relevant these discussions are, the diversity of issues impacted by AI and AI development. And on this, the one hand, there are solutions to some of these challenges, but they are going to be evolving and require certain flexibility, certainly requiring us all to research, follow the news, follow the trends, and keep pace. I think just the rapid development over the past few years has been, really astounding, particularly for someone, I think, like many of us, who didn't follow the development of AI until really ChatGPT exploded. So I think some good food for thought, and thinking about how we can prepare ourselves and thinking about the years to come. But with this, and I think to start moving towards closing up, I would encourage anyone to continue to post any questions in the chat. And I think great to see panelists have answered most of the questions there. But with that, I would like to turn back to you, Carrie, for some closing or some final thoughts and closing remarks.
Great. Thanks so much, Ryan. And I would like to begin again by thanking all of you, and especially to really thank our partner, the Bali Process, our fantastic panelists, and all of you participants for this important discussion. As we come to the end of our second of our webinar series, this has really been, I think, a very rich discussion. I have learned a lot, taken a lot of notes, and really appreciate the great contributions of our fantastic panelists, as well as the good questions from the audience. We're really proud at the OSCE of our partnership with the Bali process on this topic, also in the publication that we did jointly, as well as our great partnership with Tech Against Trafficking, and really appreciate the depth of analysis and recommendations from both of those organizations and all of the panelists today. As we've heard from today's discussion, the risks posed by the sophistication of AI models is increasing, and criminals are using AI at scale to connect to more vulnerable communities. Deep fakes are on the rise that facilitate different trafficking forms, including forced criminality into scam compounds. I appreciate it. I had not yet heard the term. I forget now who said it. I think it was Priyank said the scandemic. I had not heard that term before, but boy, does it resonate with me as the fastest growing form of human trafficking. We've also seen that AI is on the rise in sexual exploitation, especially of children. Trafficking crimes are continuing to proliferate, converging with various other crimes, including financial and cyber crimes. So I think today's conversation has really brought together some of the key actors in helping us understand and combat all of these connecting linkages. We've also heard about how fast AI is developing and criminals are adapting it, and that it's getting both easier and cheaper to do so. What I really appreciated about this conversation and the focus of so many of our partners, including both the Bali process and Tech Against Trafficking, is that we've also focused on the positive use of technology and some of the solutions and some really good concrete recommendations from today's speakers. So today's discussion, I hope, left all of you also with a sense of the opportunities that come with AI for us to join forces and its positive use as a force multiplier, as many of you said, in efforts to combat human trafficking and protect and empower victims and survivors. We heard from virtually all of our speakers that we need better collaboration with and among tech companies, social media companies, to understand recruitment patterns, techniques employed by criminals using technological advancements, and to develop joint solutions, leveraging the expertise and competencies of each of us. We also heard again and again that public-private partnership is essential, and we need to ensure that we are ready to address the emerging risks of generative AI through interdisciplinary teams comprised of public and private sector, as proposed by the panel, is a key solution to ensure readiness to address this phenomenon effectively. Two key themes that I take away from this that I think really were infused throughout the conversation. The first is the urgency to act. That, again, I hope really motivates all of us, and the critical importance of collaboration among and within the private sector and with anti-trafficking stakeholders. So with those themes of urgency and collaboration, I thank you again for joining us today and for your commitment to advance anti-trafficking action in this evolving digital era. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks you, Carrie, and thank you for the partnership from our side as well. Really looking forward to next steps in continuing these discussions. A final thanks to all the panelists here. Yeah, do stay in touch, and for anyone in the audience, please do reach out. Happy to continue these discussions offline. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening, rest of your day, whatever time it may be for you in the world. Goodbye.